But let's walk through this jobs report. You said it was bad. So talk us through some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is an incredibly disconcerting report. We're seeing not only a slowdown in the pace of jobs that the labor market's adding, but there's also some signals there that future growth might be slower too. We saw a decline in the labor force participation rate, which, and particularly for women in their prime working years, would suggest that the closing of in-person schooling and a lack of availability of other childcare issues does suggest there's going to be some hindrances to labor force growth moving forward.
So in addition to that tick downward in that labor force participation rate, which I want to ask you about in a moment, are there any other big red flags for you out of this report?
So while the top line unemployment rate did go down, we did see a rise in permanent job loser unemployment. One of the stories of this recovery has been the large share of people who are on temporary layoff and hopefully could be recalled quickly to their previous job. But what we're seeing now is that the number of people who are permanently separated from their job keeps going up, and folks in that category have a much harder time finding a new job, which again suggests that the gains of the last few months could seem pretty rosy in comparison to what we'll see in the future.
So on that labor force participation rate, as you mentioned, it is dropping, and it's dropping in a category of young folks that really should be continuing to try to get work right now. Do you think, particularly as this pandemic drags on, that those, and it's ticking most, as you even noted in your note, amongst women, I believe 25 to 34 was that age range. Do you think that some folks are just saying, you know what, I give up, I'm going to try again, maybe in a couple of months when things start to reopen?
I think that is a possibility. That the gender differential there, I think, does suggest that a lot of this has to do with care responsibilities. That with schools not being open and childcare being a much more, in the home activity for many households than it was merely a few months ago, that women are bearing that more, and that's why we're seeing a decline in the labor force participation rate.
I do want to mention here, a recent study actually showed that 25% of women were actually staying away from work over their childcare issues. That is compared, of course, to less than 10% of men. So back to this jobs report, we are seeing those job gains start to slow, the drop in unemployment start to slow down. What do you think that this is going to mean for the labor market in October, in November, into 2021?
I think the important thing to remember is not only are we seeing slowing momentum, but there are obstacles ahead for the labor market. First of all, there's the very strong possibility, at least according to epidemiological models, that there is another rise in coronavirus cases. And if there's been one thing we know is that the economy is really driven by the virus these days. So that if we do see a pickup in those cases, there's a very strong possibility it's going to slow down the entire economy, including the labor market. And I think there's also the fact that late fall and winter are approaching, and for many businesses in hard-hit sectors like restaurants, there's going to be fewer availabilities for outdoor dining, especially in the northern parts of the country, and that could put a hindrance on recalls and hiring across the economy.
Speaking about that uptick, Nick, do you think that we could perhaps see a reversal of some of those job gains in the coming months?
I think it's really uncertain. I think another obstacle there is the fact that the outlook for fiscal policy is highly uncertain. There's apparently some movement on Capitol Hill this afternoon, but we are still seeing these large numbers. When it comes to job gains, even if it's decelerating, that there's really been a tailwind there from fiscal stimulus. And if we don't see that come back, I think that does present some downside risk when it comes to employment growth.
So I mentioned at the beginning of the show, stimulus, those talks, they have had renewed optimism, particularly after the Democrats came up with their $2.2 trillion proposal. And then, of course, there was that counter proposal from the White House. I'm wondering if you think that perhaps if we get some sort of deal reached in the coming weeks, perhaps by the time of the election or shortly thereafter, if that could perhaps kickstart some of those labor gains that we had been seeing a couple of months ago.
That is a possibility, that if we see a fiscal stimulus program that does cushion household incomes and therefore keep consumption, or at least in the sectors of the economy that have seen consumption stay fairly steady, that could result in relatively strong or continued gains in sections of the labor market, which could get the economy to the other side of this winter and potential surge in cases.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.